Welcome back.
Welcome back to Hear Us Out. I'm Renee.
I'm Curry.
As usual, thank you so much to our longtime subscribers who've been with us since the very beginning, and for those who have come along the way, thank you so much for still being here. And to any new listeners, make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you can continue to get notifications
Mm-hmm.
to hear us out.
Yeah, thank you. And in this episode, we are reaching the home stretch
Uh-huh.
of our reading of Plato's Republic.
Mm-hmm.
There's only 10 books so far,
Yep.
and this is book 8.
Mm-hmm. And I must say that book 8 is it is quite
Mm-hmm.
refreshing, and it's the book that I said so far that if I was teaching a class or having any sort of like discussions or whatever, that this would be the one
Mm-hmm.
that I would definitely teach. And I feel like it's so far his absolute best, work
Mm-hmm.
right here in
And
book 8. Mm-hmm.
I know in last week we discussed the cave.
Right.
We discussed perhaps the most famous
Mm-hmm. Right. That's the one that people tend
republics.
to tend to know of the books.
Yeah,
Right. Mm-hmm.
of Plato's parables.
Right.
And we were a bit disappointed because, I guess number one, we know
Right.
we've heard about the cave, so it really
Right.
wasn't hearing anything new,
No.
but
Right.
it was all in service
Mm-hmm.
toward, the ideals of the philosopher king and all
Uh.
that stuff, and trying to once again break down
Uh.
what good is
Right.
and to its most useful pragmatic
Right.
components, all that stuff that we've
Right.
talked about before in
Mm-hmm.
discussing this, and all the same trite,
Yeah.
arguments. We're like,
Right.
oh, I
Yeah.
can't believe that this was in service, like that parable the cave was all in
Right, in
service.
terms of this, and like I mentioned, when I was reading it, and then right at a certain point, it was real early. I said, "Okay, I already know where
Yeah,
this is going," because it just pretty much reinforced, a lot of the things that he had already mentioned in previous books.
yeah.
But he really,
And
crystallized it there.
when I started reading
Uh huh.
this chapter,
Yeah, I'm like, now
now
this is
I
it.
said,
This is it right here.
if you were to read anything from the
Yes.
Republic, I
Uh,
would recommend
book
book 8.
8. Mm-hmm.
And it could be book 8, 9, and 10,
Yeah.
because we still got 2 more to go.
Uh huh.
But so far, I know I said book 6
Yeah.
was my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Book 8.
Yeah. Book 8
Book 8. Book
is
6
the
might be my favorite, but book 8 so far has been the best
yes.
chapter.
Yes,
So,
and it's quite
so
relevant.
I mean,
Even
that's what it is.
that's
About
what
the
it is,
book.
right? It's so relevant
Is that
even today.
it's relevant. So
Uh-huh.
let's get started.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
get started.
Mm-hmm.
And let's get started.
Yeah.
So book 8 is really just, let me see, is really just Plato going over different types of government and really hearkening back to a point he wanted to make in book 5.
Mm-hmm.
Right before he got sidetracked
Mm-hmm.
in 6 and 7,
Mm-hmm.
discussing, the good
Mm-hmm.
and trying to hone that down and really honing in on his ideas of the philosopher king.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of book 5, Plato wanted to. He was beginning to, after he had established, the virtues
Mm-hmm.
of a good society. After he had established, temperance and justice and
Mm-hmm.
all of these things. After he had established all of that, he was going to begin to talk about the inverse,
Right.
the vices
Mm-hmm.
that that the types of government can create, and especially the type of people
Mm-hmm.
that differing types of governments
Great.
creates.
Right.
And with his ideals of aristocracy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, he believes that is going to be able to produce the best kind of person,
Mm-hmm.
who's going to be able to occupy those roles that society
Mm-hmm.
needs them to occupy to their absolute best
Right.
in the optimal positions. Now, in book 8, he's going over the differing types of government
Right.
and how they produce suboptimal types of people
Mm-hmm.
who end up, you could say, being bad
Yeah.
influences
Right.
on the health of the city as a
Mhm.
whole.
Yeah, there are weaknesses there, and I guess in each one he
Hmm.
discusses how particular governments come to be
Hmm.
because of a particular weakness that's within that government. So
Yeah.
yes. Hmm.
So let me see. He begins talking about all the because he's talking with Glaucon,
Yes.
his
Yes,
favorite
his favorite person, I
favorite
guess
person
he's
to talk
talking
to.
to, right?
He's talking with Glaucon, and I think in the last few chapters he was talking to Edamantos,
Yeah.
who's Glaucon's little brother.
Right.
So he's talking to them,
Right.
and he says something about let me see. I do desire to hear for myself what you meant by the four constitutions,
Hmm.
and that's Glaucon saying
Right.
that, and he uses constitutions. When he says constitution, he's meaning like a form of government.
Government. Right.
He's not literally talking about
About
a constitution.
institution.
We
Right.
talk about different forms of government,
Hmm.
right? And he says that will not be difficult. You shall hear these. You shall hear these are what I mean, as far as they have names. First, your Cretan and Laconian, which are generally praised. The second is called oligarchy, the rule of the few, which is praised in the second place, a constitution full of many evils. Next, after this comes democracy, the rule of the people, its antagonist, which naturally follows. And last, far removed from all these, that glorious thing, tyranny. Fourth, the extremest pestilence which a city can have. Can you name any other kind of constitution that stands in a distinct class? There are principalities, I suppose, and purchase royalties and constitutions of such kind somewhere in between these. One can find more of them among barbarians than Hellenes.
Hmm.
A good few, and strange ones, as they are described. Well, then, you know there must be as many kinds of men as constitutions. You don't suppose the constitutions grow out of a tree or a stone? No, they grew out of men's manner in the cities. Whichever manners tip the scales down, so to speak, and draw the others after them.
Hmm. So think of democracy as
Well, he hasn't really said
right.
democracy yet.
He didn't say that. So democracy as rule of honor, or
Laconian.
yeah, rule of honor, honor rule, oligarchy as few rule,
Hmm.
rich rule. Democracy is all rule, and I'm using all of this in quotations. Tyranny as that one rule, you know, and aristocracy as the best rule.
Yeah, well, it's just listen, we said Plato is just really what he wants to talk about
Mm-hmm.
is how these differing types of government
Mm-hmm.
fail their people in
Yeah.
that they produce failures in a
Mm-hmm.
sense as far as Plato's concerned. It produced people that are harmful to the overall maintenance of the
Of the
city
city.
that
Mm-hmm.
leads to strife and madness.
Yeah.
That's the type of person that these particular constitutions
Mm-hmm.
give rise to.
Right. It's
And
all about the conditions of the city.
mhm.
You understand what I'm saying? So the constitutions, they are derived, by the conditions in each one of the
Hmm.
cities. So keep that in mind.
Or and from Plato's perspective, these constitutions produce
Yeah.
those kinds
Mm-hmm.
of predicaments, those kinds of environments. And one of the key differences between how you and I look at
Mm-hmm.
a city or a government or anything,
Mm-hmm.
a people really,
Right.
and how Plato, Socrates looks at
Mm-hmm.
a people is that he is very top down
Mm-hmm.
in how he looks at it.
Right.
He believes that the type of government, your type of society produces your type of people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we're, the
The
opposite.
opposite,
We
right?
believe a type of people
People
produce
produces. Mm-hmm.
a type of government.
Mm-hmm.
So when Plato wants to create change in his societies, or when he wants to analyze
Mm-hmm.
why something is happening in all these other societies, he immediately starts at the top,
Mm-hmm.
right? He immediately starts at governments,
Mm-hmm.
at your rulers and stuff like that, which it isn't wrong
All right.
Well, that's not wrong.
Mhm.
We do that a lot.
Mhm.
Analyze government because we usually say, someone's always profiting from something.
Mhm.
So you go where the money is.
Right.
Follow the money.
Part of the
Money
money. Right.
always pulls up at the top. But when you're trying to analyze a people, right? And that's really what he said. He wants to talk about,
Mhm.
you know, how because these constitutions grow out of men's manners,
Mhm.
as he says. So if he wants to, analyze the manner of men, then your government is, I would say, the law is the last thing
Right.
that props up
Mhm.
out of the manner of men.
Yeah. Mhm.
Things change, and usually your laws are the last thing to catch up to that change.
Right.
Your government is the last thing to catch up to that
Mhm.
because your government is best itself
Mhm.
when it is stationary
Right.
and when everything is in its place in that one stationary moment.
Yeah. Your
But
government tends to be reactionary. It
yeah,
reacts
yeah,
versus
but your
Mhm.
people grow and
Mhm.
change as people do,
Right.
and your government is usually the last thing to grow and change.
Right.
With its people.
Right.
But like I said, there's just a fundamental difference in
Mhm.
how Socrates analyzes
Mhm.
a city. And so, from his perspective, the government, your constitution produces the manner of man,
Mhm.
right? And you were going to see how 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 that plays into Plato's narrative
Right.
about his
Mhm.
form of government.
Government. Mhm.
You see, because to Plato, because he literally says it right here. We have already described the man who is like aristocracy, the rule of the best,
Mhm.
the one whom we properly describe as good and just, the best man.
Mhm.
You know, the whole time Plato has been talking about aristocracy,
Right.
his rule of the best. And his
Mhm.
idea is that an aristocratic society, as described by Plato,
Mhm.
is going to be able to produce the type of people that are going to be able to play their
Mhm.
roles or do their jobs
Jobs.
the
The best.
best.
Mhm.
His aristocratic society will produce the best farmers
Mhm.
and the best laymen and the
Mhm.
best rulers, and each one given everything that they need
Mhm.
and just what is necessary for them to be the best and to
Mhm.
do their jobs, right? And, and that's where all the other forms of government fail,
Mhm.
right? And really, what he's talking about, because when he's talking about the different forms of constitutions, is the type of people that they
Right.
produce.
Mhm.
So the forms of government are kind of secondary to that point for you,
Mhm.
right? They fail because they can't produce the type
Type of
of person
right
that is best able to do their job,
job. Mhm.
right? And for him, like we've talked about many times before, their job is who they are.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
so if you allow a person to do their job, you allow a person to best be themselves,
Mhm.
as far as Plato is concerned,
Mhm.
right? We've talked
Yeah. We
many a
talked
times
about that.
about
Yeah.
that, but that is Plato's big point here.
Mhm.
And when he means aristocracy, when it's rule of best,
Mhm.
right? His aristocracy is the best people in the best
Mhm.
positions. Now, aristocracy in real life has never really been
Yeah,
about
that's right.
the
About
rule of the
the
best,
best.
or the best has
Even
never been about the person best able to do the job.
job.
It's
Mhm.
more about best blood,
Mhm.
noble families,
Right.
and titles and
Right.
stuff like that. And that's always what these things tend
Tend
to
to be.
be,
Yeah.
even in Plato's
Mhm.
ideas, like we've discussed many times before, that what the idea of the best isn't coming from the people as a whole.
Right. It's coming
It's coming
from
from your kingmakers,
right.
from the people who choose your
Right.
rulers, right? And he's already talked about how the rulers are the best of the people in the city as a whole, that the
Right.
guardians are the best
Mhm.
of the people as a whole,
Mhm.
right? And that if you actually want to find those virtues, you don't look at the farmer,
Right.
you look at the
Right.
guardians, as far as Plato is concerned.
Mhm.
That's how he derived all his virtues and
Mhm.
to begin with.
Mhm.
Now, you do all of this. You do your aristocracy, your
Mhm.
rule of the best.
Mhm.
But your best isn't your best is not what the people say.
Right.
It's what your councilmen say,
Right.
what your old men say.
Mm-hmm.
Those people who you say have the most valued opinions,
Mm-hmm.
or not opinions, but have the greatest reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the greatest reasoning. For us, it's only opinion.
Yeah.
But for him, it's set in stone.
Stone, right.
And it's funny how, which we're going to see many times throughout
right.
this chapter, how Plato is able to pick apart these differing types of government and the people that they create, and how dead on he is with his analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But he cannot see
that
in aristocracy. He can't see it in his form of
right.
Right, because for us, oligarchy is aristocracy.
Yes.
Right?
right.
Oligarchy is aristocracy. Tyranny ends up being aristocracy at the end of the day.
Right.
Even your democracy tends to at times. So aristocracy, the idea that the best people ought to be the rulers, and, the revolving door of what the best actually means, always ends up creating a group of people who have the power to shape society for the rest. Whether it's one person, tyranny, a group of people, or in democracy, how would you say it? A group among groups of people. It always ends up that way. It always ends up falling, and your aristocracy is no different.
Right.
Not even your Laconian government, your democracy ends up being any different, and he knows that. But the thing is that, like you say, the cognitive dissonance,
right?
He can recognize it in all these other forms of
right.
government and all these vices, but he can't recognize how his own type of aristocracy can end up.
It's problematic.
It's problematic on that same path. So, yeah, let's get started. And he first begins with his analysis of democracy, right? And democracy is a term that he comes up with in this. He literally comes up with the idea of democracy, because what he really means when he talks about Laconian society is Sparta. Sparta was the name of the country, but Laconian and Cretan was the name of the culture of the people. And he means, the rule of honor, right? The rule of honor. So let's get started here, all right? Come on, then, let us try to say how a democracy would grow out of an aristocracy. One thing is plain, I think. Change in the Constitution always begins from the governing class, when there is a faction within. But so long as they are of one mind, even if they be a very small class, it is impossible to disturb them. Very well, Glaucon. How will our city be disturbed? How will the assistants and rulers quarrel with one another and themselves? Would you like us to beseech the Muses, as Homer does, to tell us how first fell faction among them? And should we imagine the Muses mouthing their words in the lofty tragic vein, while really they are playing up mock heroic and teasing us as if we were children? Right? So, really, just as a preamble here, he's talking about a process. He's not discussing each form of government in and of themselves. He's literally what he just said. He wants to talk about how an aristocracy can fall into a democracy, how rule of the best can become rule of honor, and then it's going to be how rule of honor becomes rule of the few, the property owners, and how that ends up becoming democracy, and how democracy ends up becoming tyranny. So he's talking about a process here. So what he's saying really is he's talking about the things that his aristocracy should avoid to maintain itself. Because if it doesn't avoid these things, then you're on that path to tyranny. Right? So let's see this. It's a whole lot.
Yeah.
A whole lot. And he says, it begins, right? Because now he's talking about how, literally the type of person, that a government produces, right? And literally what he wants to say here is that, when faction comes up, there is a tug of war between the two breeds among the guardians, iron and brazen, pulling towards money making and freehold property and riches of silver and gold, and on the other side, the silver and golden, being themselves naturally rich in their souls, not poor, pull towards virtue in the ancient tradition. So after a violent struggle, together they compromised the matter. They would share land and houses among themselves in private possession, and then make slaves of those whom they had been guarding in freedom, their friends and supporters, keeping them now as yeomen and servants, and themselves managing war and guardianship over them. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So his big thing here, because before that he has this whole arithmetic of relationship that
Mm-hmm.
we're really not going to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Because his main point here, when he talks about how an aristocracy becomes a timocracy, how the rule of best becomes the rule of honor, is that you're going to have those who are of lower metals, of more unpure metals,
Mm-hmm.
like he says, of the iron and brazen,
Mm-hmm.
bronze,
Right.
who are going to be good at making money,
Mm-hmm.
at having property. But there's going to be the people of silver and gold
Mm-hmm.
who, like, say, well, rich in their souls, who have no need of pursuing such things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be something of a tiff between them because the silver and gold are your rulers,
Mm-hmm.
right? But your iron and bronze are your landowners.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be something of a tiff
Mm-hmm.
between them. We talked about before why, there is going to be the land, all that stuff is going to be owned by the state,
Right.
right? So to try to avoid a situation like this where there's a power struggle between your rulers and your proprietors,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when that struggle happens, there you like he says, that ends up in a compromise between the two parties that kind of lets the proprietors at the table, lets them kind of raises their class a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and their friends end up becoming their servants,
Mm-hmm.
and you end up on that fast track toward oligarchy, right? Or really, his form of honor, right? The form of honor becomes a form of wealth in a sense. Your honor is connected to your wealth, to
Mm-hmm.
your property, to your money, and it begins to tend away from the virtue,
Mm-hmm.
as he says,
Mm-hmm.
right? It says accordingly, this would be a constitution between aristocracy and oligarchy. Thus, then, the change will come about. But after the change, how will it go on? Obviously, it will imitate partly the old constitution and partly oligarchy, being between them, and it will also have something of its own. Then, in honoring the rulers, in keeping away from agriculture and handicrafts and money making, that part which fights for the city, in establishing messes and attending to gymnastic and training of war, and all such things, it will imitate the old constitution. But in many ways, it will also have special customs of its own. Thus, it will fear to bring the wise into places of government, because the men of that sort which it has are no longer simple and earnest, but a mixture. It will incline to the high spirited and more single minded men, those whose nature is rather for war than for peace, and it will hold in honor warlike stratagems and contrivances and spend the whole time in war.
Mm-hmm.
This is the democracy he's describing,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere between aristocracy and oligarchy,
Mm-hmm.
and how when the the rulers become so fixated on honor,
Mm-hmm.
right, and your honor is your wealth, these things become equated with war,
Mm-hmm.
with winning war, because how was the best way to expand one's
Yeah.
property, expand
Right.
one's wealth?
Right. Right. To conquer it. Correct.
Right? So honor becomes intermingled with war,
Mm-hmm.
and your rulers begin to prioritize it
Mm-hmm.
to the exclusion of anything else.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell what he's describing here. He's
Mm-hmm.
describing Sparta. He's describing
Yes.
those warrior cultures of his day,
That's right.
right?
Yeah, because the rulers would, they won't be able to put up the kind of fights that the democratic, man would be able to put up. You know, he's much more versed in war. While your rulers, you're just making rules. You know, but you don't fight. So now you have this democratic man who's not only does he have property, so he has wealth, he can
But he
also fight.
prioritizes
Yeah,
war.
right.
He prioritizes warring, and honor becomes,
Comes
his your affinity for war, your affinity for battle, your affinity to accrue wealth
right.
in anyone, right? And you begin to prioritize these things to the exclusion of all other things.
Yep.
Right, and he
Yep.
said that you have a whole culture that falls in love,
Yep.
with war. That is at war, spent his whole time dealing with war.
Yeah, that's his problem. His prowess is war. He claims right to rule because of his prowess in war. He's a great fighter and a great hunter. That's that's what he does, right?
Now let's take a step back and talk about that cognitive dissonance that we've said many times before.
Right.
In the last, we talked about how you have a warrior culture and expect it to produce philosophy.
That's right. I mean, he even mentions at the very beginning of book 8 how how everything is common. Because I think I even wrote it down. Women in common, education in common, children in common, both in war and peace. So their whole framework, like you said,
your whole framework,
your
culture, like you said, you can't talk about how a democracy, you're right, how Sparta obsesses over war, and you will want to take children on the battlefield,
right, and have them taste blood,
have them taste the blood and get acquainted with the gore of war. Your entire culture has prioritized, like we said before, the warrior.
That's right.
You said it yourself that your warriors and rulers are the best of your people. So the culture that the farmer exists in your aristocracy is a culture of warriors.
That's right.
Of warriors and rulers. The culture that your craftsmen, your teachers, your nurses all exist in is a warrior culture. Right. That's what your city has. So your city has a preoccupation with war. But it thinks it's going to be able to tame it with philosophy.
Right.
Right. But even then, even then, you talked about how, like, even your philosophical pursuits, the music of your city, right, the art, all of that has been edited and pared down in service to your rulers and your guardians. What do you think the type of people you're going to create?
Right.
You can abhor your democracy as much as you want and talk about how it has this preoccupation with war, but like you're doing the exact same thing.
It was established from cradle to grave, right?
Your philosophers gain their recognition, become the best, right, at war. According to your own,
you said that yourself, right?
That when someone distinguishes themselves in war, they should be risen, to that status. So you don't think that your people are going to have a preoccupation, a particular predilection for war? Because that's one of the few metrics that a farmer can become.
That's right.
A ruler. You don't think that they're going to have that preoccupation? Your city, your aristocracy in and of itself has prioritized war and winning the war over anything else, to the detriment of your philosophy, because they can't listen to all of the music. They don't even know all their history. Everything has been edited in service to these ideals of usefulness.
So there you go, right?
Right there, you're creating the exact type of thing you're railing against in your discussion of democracy, of the rule of honor.
Right.
Like you say,
you can see it, but you
see it everywhere else. You can't see it here.
Right.
And he continues, because now he's talking about how that rule of honor ends up tending toward oligarchy, how it ends up becoming oligarchy at the end of the day. Covetous, again, such men will be, covetous of riches, as those in oligarchies are, with a fierce love in the darkness for gold and silver. Now they are possessed of storehouses and private treasuries to store and hide these things in. They will build habitations about them to dwell in, nothing less than little nests for themselves, in which they can spend fortunes, lavishing money on their women, and any others they may wish. And so there will be misers with their own money, because they value it so and have to keep it hidden. But spendthrifts with the money of others because of their desire, they will enjoy their pleasures in secret, running away from the law like boys who run from their fathers, since force and not persuasion has educated them, all because they have neglected the true muse, the comrade of reason and philosophy, and have honored gymnastic with greater reverence than music.
I mean,
Like we said, we've already discussed
yeah.
this. Like, yes, you are right.
Mm-hmm.
They have a cultural preoccupation
Mm-hmm.
with war,
Mm-hmm.
and war in and of itself is merely an extension of greed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you understand that, Socrates.
Right. Very good. Right.
Very good. But it's the same thing for your city.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no, you want to temper it. You want to temper the gymnastic, the war loving, with also the war with the love of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't
right.
philosophy
Right.
in pieces and war in total.
Right. That's not how
Right?
it goes, right?
You only want them to love that piece of philosophy that makes them better at war. You said it yourself.
Right.
So you're not tempering, you're emboldening.
Mm-hmm.
There's no give and take here. Everything is in service to war, even in your metric.
Mm-hmm.
So either you act, but like you said, philosophy makes unfit warriors and unfit rulers when taken in and of its whole.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to pare it down to make sure they still want to be rulers and warriors. See, you can't have it both ways. You can't have philosophy. You can't have it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want? Do you want philosophers or do you want rulers?
Right.
You can't have it both ways.
Right.
It seems like the people in this democracy are a bit more honest with themselves.
Yeah.
About the society that they're living in. They want rulers and warriors.
Mm-hmm.
And their entire society is geared toward that.
Right.
Everything is in service to that. They understand that.
That was the idea.
So like I said, you can see that there.
But you can't see it here. Right.
All right. So now let's talk about the type of person, how the son of the democratic person becomes an oligarch. Right? It begins when he hears his mother grumbling that her husband is not one of the governing class, and so the other women look down upon her. Then she sees that her husband does not worry much about money and will not fight in private lawsuits and in parliament. He takes all that quietly, and she notices he is always attending to himself and doesn't pay much respect to her, though he is never rude to her. So the boy just listens, and she goes on grumbling because of all this, that father is no man and only slack, and all the other grievances which women love to harp on. You're right, said Adeimantus. No end of grievances. That's just like the woman. Then you know too, said I, that the servants of such people, servants who seem to be loyal, sometimes say the same sort of thing to the sons quietly. And if they see someone in their debt, and the father will not prosecute, or any other wrong they may see, they exhort the boy to punish them all when he grows up, and be more of a man than father. And out of doors he hears and sees other things of the same sort, those in the city that attend quietly to their own business being called simpletons and thought little of, while those who meddle in other businesses are honored and praised. Then as the young man hears and sees all this, and hears on the contrary what his father says, and compares his ways with the others, he is attracted by both. His father's waters and fosters the reasoning part in his soul, the others the desiring and high-spirited part. So because his nature is not evil, but is influenced by the evil natures of his companions, he is dragged into the middle by both these, and yields the governance of himself to the mean, the self-asserting and high-spirited part, and becomes an ambitious and honor-loving man. Boom. That's what he talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You have I think what he's talking about here is how your democratic oligarchical youth is produced.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have the father who is of silver and gold.
Right.
So is not preoccupied with wealth. But then there's going to be those other people will get into his son's ear,
Mm-hmm.
the women folk and the servants,
Right. Right.
who are gonna see that as a weakness
Mm-hmm.
in the father.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna see it as a weakness in him, and they're gonna beseech the son to not be like the father
Right.
and to pursue these things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the son is going to be caught in between the two,
Mm-hmm.
and most likely he's going to end up falling, for the high spirited,
Mm-hmm.
and he's going to become ambitious and
Mm-hmm.
honor loving, which
Mm-hmm.
means greedy.
Right.
He's going to become ambitious and greedy. He's going to become an oligarch, and he's
Mm-hmm.
going to prioritize being everything that the
His father
father
wasn't.
was not.
That's right.
Very apt. Very
Yeah.
apt. Yeah.
Yeah. Pick a movie, pick a book.
And pick a point in history.
Yeah, pick a point in history. That's right.
You've seen it time
That's
and
right.
time again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he does all these little allusions that he makes about how he talks about how a democratic oligarchical youth is created.
Mm-hmm.
He goes on to talk about how the city in and of itself
Mm-hmm.
goes from democratic, which is somewhere in the middle,
Right.
to full on oligarchical.
Mm.
Right? Let me see. Next, then, shall we tell of another man set up against another city, as the Skillets might say, or rather take the city first, according to our system? Well, the next constitution, I think, would be oligarchy. What sort of establishment would you call oligarchy? A constitution, according to property, in which the rich govern and the poor man has no share in
Mm-hmm.
government. I understand. Then shall I explain first how democracy changes into oligarchy? Yes, yet a blind man could see it, I said. How? That storehouses full of gold, which every man has, destroy such a constitution. First they invent ways of spending for themselves, and neither they nor their wives obey the laws, but they pervert them to support this. After that, they observe each other and rival each other, and make the whole body of the people like themselves. By and by, then, they push ahead with their money making, and more they value money, and less they value virtue. In truth, we may imagine riches and virtue as always balanced in scales against each other. And when riches are honored in the city, virtue in the people, and the good people are less honored than the rich. Now, what is honored anywhere is practiced, and what is dishonored is neglected. Thus, in the end, they have become lovers of money and money making, and no longer aim at honor and ambition. They praise the rich man and admire him and bring him into places of government, and the poor man they dishonor.
Mm-hmm.
So then they lay down a law of limitation in the Constitution. They fix a sum of money, greater or less, according to the oligarchy, is more or less complete, and proclaim that no one may share in the government unless his property comes up to the assessment.
Mm-hmm.
This they carry out by force of arms, or they have used terror before this to establish such a constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think so?
Yeah. So in essence, the money is valued less of a virtue. Well, actually, the money and the money making becomes the
Becomes
virtue.
the virtue, yeah.
Okay, and if you do not have, a particular amount of money and assessments, then you are not even a part, of this class. And so where Socrates, because you want to have a unified city here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in essence, you're creating two cities under an oligarch.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. You're creating, a have and a have not, And what happens is that everyone is pointing at each other, right? The poor point at the rich is the problem. And of course, the rich pointing at y'all that y'all are the problem and don't want to have anything to even do with y'all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a constant strife.
And one of the things that we're going to notice here,
mm-hmm.
in this process is how all of the different forms of government always rise as a defense of the former.
Mm-hmm.
Democracy rose as a defense for aristocracy, to defend itself from the greed, right? But the democracy produces people who value greed. as Plato talked about before,
Right.
because of all the reasons he said.
Mm-hmm.
And for the democracy to defend itself,
Right.
right? Even because all of the people at the very heads of the democracy, they said they have storehouses full of gold.
Mm-hmm.
They begin to value it,
Mm-hmm.
to like I say, to the exclusion of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And there goes these other people who don't have said wealth,
Mm-hmm.
who want to reach that stratum.
Right.
So to defend themselves,
Mm-hmm.
to defend their love of greed, they create an oligarchy, and they
Mm-hmm.
create a ceiling
Mm-hmm.
that says that if you don't have this much
Right.
wealth, if you don't have this much property, then you don't get a say.
Right.
And they enforce it, whether through arms or by fear, but any way they can,
Mm-hmm.
they enforce that to defend their riches.
Right.
Their riches, their money making ability that has been equated with virtue,
Mm-hmm.
with honor.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we see, all these differing forms of government always rise as a defense,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oligarchy rose as a defense for democracy.
That's right.
And you see, and the wheel keeps spinning
Mm-hmm.
because democracy, as far as Plato is concerned, rises as a defense of oligarchy.
Right. I mean, you can look at what we're doing now.
Mm.
How poor people, the striving, to become, the millionaire and the billionaire.
Mm.
And how it is that, if they are ever able to get in that particular stratum, what happens?
Mm-hmm.
They defend it to the T. They defend it to the T, and they want to keep folks out. So it's the same stuff over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you have.
So now we're going to go on talking about democracy. Because we know what an oligarchy is.
Mm-hmm.
It's the rule of those property owners.
Mm-hmm.
It's the rule of those people who own all the property, who own all the stuff.
Right. If you're a poor man, you have no say.
Yes.
You are to be ruled. Period. You have no say.
And they created this form of government to defend their honor.
Right.
Which
right.
means to defend their riches.
That's right.
from the people who want a piece of the pie.
Right.
Right. So now he goes on to analyze what you call it. He goes to analyze oligarchy in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He goes on about, let me see,
how the oligarchy changes into a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Through its insatiate desires for that which it sets before itself as a good and a duty to become as rich as possible.
Yep.
That's the goal. And in a democracy, you see that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you shouldn't. You think you wouldn't.
Because
see
one
that?
of the things that
but that's
one of the things that Plato talks about here is how, let me see, because I have a lot of
you have a lot of jibber
jabber.
Yeah,
My thoughts.
Are you on 355 word?
I'm on 353.
Okay, all right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because he says, well then, the oligarchy changes into a democracy, something in its way. Like you said, through its insatiate desires for that which it sets before itself as a good and a duty to become as rich as possible. Right? The rulers hold their position, I take it, because of their great possessions. And they will not make laws against undisciplined young men to prevent any who may turn up from running through their fortunes. They hope to lend money on the property of such men, and they buy it up, and so to become richer and more honorable than ever. Well, we have already clearly seen that to honor riches and at the same time to acquire enough temperance is a thing impossible for the citizen in the city. Yes, they must of necessity neglect one of the two. So in the oligarchies, by overlooking or even encouraging intemperance, they have sometimes compelled men, not ignoble, to become paupers. And there they sit idle, I suppose, in the city, stings ready, that is, fully armed, some in debt, some disenfranchised, some both, hating and plotting against those who have gotten their goods, and everybody else in love with revolution. and their other moneymakers, stooping as they go and pretending not to see them. When any of the others submits, they wound him with a shot of money and carry off multiplicated interest, the offspring of the parent loan, and so they fill the city with drones and beggars. Here is a fire of evil, blazing up, which they do not want to quench, although they could in two ways. One is what I suggested by preventing a man from turning his property to any purpose he likes. The other is by doing away with such evils by a different law. And what is the other law? The next best law, one that compels the citizens to care for virtue. For if it laid down that in most of the voluntary contracts a man must act on his own risk, people in the city would not be so shameless in their dealings. Not so many of those evils we have mentioned would come up at all. But as things are, and for all such reasons, you see what a state the rulers have brought the ruled into. And as to themselves and their sons, are not the young people luxurious and lazy in matters concerning both body and soul? And are they not too soft to stand firm before both pleasures and pains and idle? Of course. And themselves, are they not careless of all else but making money? And do they not care no more for virtue than the poor do? No more indeed. So when thus prepared, rulers and ruler are thrown together on the march perhaps, or in some other association, whether for festival or campaign, shipmates or tentmates, or even amidst the dangers of battle, then they can observe each other, and then the poor are not despised by the rich at all. Often enough, a sinewy, sun-browned poor man may be posted in battle beside a rich man's faucet in shady places, encumbered with alien fat, and sees him panting and helpless. Don't you suppose he reflects that his own cowardice has allowed such men to be rich? Will not one pass the word to another when they meet together in private? We've got the fellows. There's nothing in them. I'm quite sure, said he, that's what they do. You know that an unhealthy body needs only to have a small push from without to make it fall ill. And sometimes even without that the body rebels against itself. Just so a city which is in the same state as the body needs only a small excuse if one party invites outside help from some oligarchic city or another from a democratic city, it falls ill in the same way and fights against itself. Or sometimes even without those outside develops internal strife. So yeah, let's just take a moment to analyze what Plato was saying here. What he's saying is that democracies are never established by poor people.
That's right.
Democracies are always established by rich people looking to expand their riches.
Yep.
And so they begin because they want to do as much business as they can with as much people. They open said business up to everyone, and the loans and the money getting becomes more predatory. Right? It becomes more predatory to the exclusion of all else. Now these poor people get upset, and in their minds, there's the resounding call for revolution, the resounding call for change. And when war begins to break out, they begin to see that the rich, quote unquote, are soft, and they have nothing behind them, right? And in that, they begin to come up with ways to overthrow the rich and have the riches be for everyone. And in place of that, you get idleness. You get a softness in spirit and body that tends toward this undisciplined ideal of freedom, which Plato likens to democracy. And like when we read it the first time, all I could think about was the American Revolution.
That's right. Right.
Because it pairs so well with
that description, right?
Because he's right. Democracies have never happened from poor people. They don't come from poor. Even in his time,
right?
With Greek democracy at the time, it was a bit more oligarchical, right, than what it is today. But for the time, it was truly a democracy, right? Those people, they were the rich. And you look at the American Revolution, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams. These people were rich.
They were wealthy. Yeah.
These were the rich. The rich who created this system.
Mm-hmm.
At no time has democracy been created by poor people.
Mm-hmm.
I say that if poor people actually were to create a form of government, it would be something more akin to the anarchy we talked about before.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But now this isn't the poor creating this system.
Mm-hmm.
It's the rich creating
Right.
this system in
Bits
defense
of its right.
of their riches.
Riches. That's right.
And look at the American Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You had all these taxes being passed by Parliament over in Britain.
Right.
This led to an angst in the people,
To-
not against Britain,
Right.
but against the rich.
Right.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But then the founding fathers,
Mm-hmm.
the rich people of the time, took that angst
Mm-hmm.
and, in defense of themselves, aimed it at the Britons
Brits. That's right.
in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And it became about taxation without representation.
Mhm.
It became about all this other stuff.
Yeah. Keep in mind here
Right?
that poor people, like that stamp tax and stuff, poor people weren't writing letters. They weren't affected by that. That was the Brits taxing, the lawyers and the rich folk over here who were their colonial subjects.
So, like I said, so it became a battle of the colonial
That's right.
wealth
Mm-hmm.
versus your old world wealth.
That's right.
And they co-opted this angst,
Mm-hmm.
and from that gave birth to the American Revolution
Right.
and American democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Because our first form of government, if we can remember, the Articles of Confederation,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Articles of Confederation gave states too much autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of fear back then of centralized governments, of too much power in one place.
Right.
But the rich people had spent so much money
Mhm.
on this war that they were in debt to the French.
Yep.
So
Right.
to reimburse themselves
Mhm.
and to pay off their debt,
Right.
they created the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution, which was then ratified,
Mhm.
dubious in and of itself.
Yes.
if you
Yes.
look
Yes.
back
Yes.
over it,
Right.
it's
Right.
been
Right. Right.
ratified
Right.
and centralized the American government.
Mm-hmm.
So our Constitution, our democracy,
Mm-hmm.
was created as a way to pay off rich people's debt
Mm-hmm.
to foreign nations.
That
You see,
you see,
like I said, Plato is more right than he can possibly
possibly even
know.
yeah. That's right.
This is prophetic. He's like peering into the future with this one. Your democracy was created as a defense of the rich and used as a tool by the rich to expand their riches.
Yep.
Because even back then, it wasn't a full-on democracy. Not all white people could vote.
Right.
It was only
Landowners.
white male landowners.
Landowners. That's right.
It then became all white men,
Mm-hmm.
then white women,
Right.
and then
know,
everybody else.
Yeah.
But still, you see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. And all
And
of that
all
was
of
still
these-
in service.
In service to that democracy,
to
as a
protecting
way,
that class of the rich. Right.
as a way to protect itself and
Mhm.
expand its own
Own
wealth
power. That's right.
even further,
Mm-hmm.
again and again and again.
That's
You see, like
here we are in the 21st century, still with that paradigm.
yeah. You
So, yeah.
see it all over the place. You see it all over the place. And I love how he talks about how at war the poor people see these rich people like, man, these people, they ain't got nothing.
Yeah, kick
We
their ass.
can take it.
Yeah.
We can take them.
Yeah.
And you can tell, like you can just see the angst
Yeah.
that these people are existing in and how it ends up becoming democracy.
Mhm.
Democracy isn't the poor taking from the rich so they can become rich themselves.
Right.
This is the rich establishing a system to expand their riches.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, giving the smallest glimmer of an opportunity to the poor for themselves to become rich.
I know that sounds so familiar. I know that sounds familiar. You cannot tell me that that's happening.
All of it.
That's what this has been.
In
That's what that
defense.
exchange has been.
In defense
Fence.
of the money.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. Democracy, oligarchy, democracy, it's all in defense of the wealth.
Yep.
Plato himself didn't say it as literally as we said,
Yeah.
but he was touching on it.
Mm-hmm.
He was touching on it. and how all of these things breed
Mm-hmm.
breed that type of mentality,
Mentality.
breed that type of worldview
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over again.
It's all in maintenance and defense of itself,
All
of the rich,
and
of rich.
what is that stuff? Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
it is the wealth, it
Mm-hmm.
is the movers and shakers, all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. So now it says he keeps going, and it says, so democracy, I suppose, comes into being when the poor conqueror and kills some of the other party and banish others and share out the citizenship and government equally with the rest. And the offices in it are generally settled by lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yes, he said, that is how democracy is established, whether by force of arms or by fear, as when the other party go out and escape.
Mm-hmm.
hmm Well, then, I said, how do these people live? And how does this Constitution also work? For it is clear that such a man will prove to be the Democratic.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, his greater point is always about the type of people
Right.
these particular governments create.
Right.
Right? So I love it because the way he talks about democracy,
Mm-hmm.
there is an angst. There's a disgust in his voice. You can
Mm-hmm.
hear it
Mm-hmm.
in how he talks about it.
Yeah, because basically it's too much for, at least for Socrates,
Mm-hmm.
is that in this democracy, right? There's too much freedom, and too much freedom, it creates the people become undisciplined, okay? And then becoming undisciplined, it creates a type of madness,
Mm.
and it lacks security, and that's how
It lacks
the
discipline.
discipline, right?
It lacks
And that's
discipline.
how
Well,
the
we're going to see
tyrant
right
comes
here.
into being, right?
In fact, this is the most beautiful of constitutions. It is decked out with all sorts and conditions of manners, as a robe of many colors is embroidered with all the flowers of the field. And what could be more beautiful? Yes, perhaps many would judge it most beautiful, staring at it like a lot of women and children admiring a pretty rock. Yes, indeed, said he. Yes, indeed, bless you. This is a city in which to look for a constitution. Why, if you please? Because of this liberty. All sorts of constitutions are there, and if anyone wants to fit up a city as we have been doing, it is only necessary for him to go to a city governed by a democracy and choose whatever fashion of constitution pleases him, as if he had come to a bazaar of constitutions. Then, having picked out his pattern, he can make his city accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps at least, he said, there would be plenty of patterns there. No necessity to be governor there, even if you are fit for it. No need to be rude if you don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
You need not go to war if they fight. You need not keep the peace if the others keep it, unless you desire peace. If a law forbids you to be magistrate or a judge, you may be magistrate and judge all the same. If you take it into your head, what a lovely, heavenly life while it lasts. Yes, while it lasts.
That's right.
He said. And what a sweet temper there in the convicts. Isn't it delightful? Haven't you seen in such a city nothing less than men condemned to death or banishment homely, remaining and mixing in society, and how a man can go about like a hero returned from the dead, nobody noticing him or seeing him? I've seen that often enough, he said. Toleration. No worrying in democracy about a trifle, with contempt of the solemn proclamations we made in founding our city that no one could become a good man unless he had a superlative nature, unless from a boy he should play among beautiful things and study beautiful practices. How magnificently it tramples all this underfoot and cares nothing what he practices before entering and living political life, but gives him honor if he only says he is loyal to the people. You can tell.
Oh yeah.
Socrates must be talking about somebody.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't mean like he talks about how forgiving and tolerant these societies are, how undisciplined they are. You don't have to listen to nobody. You can just be what you want.
Yeah, you can do what you want.
Do what
right?
you want. You pick the type of life you want, and then you just go about living it
Right.
with
And
no
if you
regard.
get into any trouble, you could be banished, but then you come back and nobody
No one
notices.
And it doesn't matter who you were.
Right.
The idea of good, like you said, in his city, you can only be good if you are brought up the
Right.
right way,
Right.
and if you're exposed to the
Mhm.
right things,
Right.
and you taught the right lessons and
Mhm.
become the right person. But
Mhm.
it doesn't matter who you were before political life. You can just get up on stage and say, "I do this for the people,"
Right. And
and then bam,
Right.
you're the best.
Right.
You're a good person now.
Right. And we need good people.
Yeah, there's all good people. Like I said, you can tell.
Right.
You can
You
tell.
just did.
You talk about
Yes.
somebody.
Right.
You talking about the world he's currently living.
Uh-huh.
This one got a bit of vitriol to it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? These things, then, and others such like them, are in democracy. A delightful constitution it will be, as it seems, no governor and plenty of color, equality of a sort distributed to equal and unequal alike.
Mm-hmm.
I just like all these things. All these things. He keeps going on and on and on and on. And he my favorite thing. My favorite one is that he has this little paragraph here
Mm-hmm.
about so they do. So then the young man comes back among these lotus eaters and makes his home there openly. And any support comes from his family for the thrifty part of his soul. Those bragging words bar up the gates of the royal castle in him, and will not let in even these allies, nor even receive an embassy of words from his older friends in private life. A battle follows, and they win. Shame they dub silliness, and cast it forth, a dishonored outlaw. Temperance they dub cowardice, trample it underfoot and banish it. They persuade the man that moderation and decent spending are clownishness and vulgarity, and drive them out beyond the border by the help of a gang of unprofitable desires. Indeed, they do. And so, having purged and swept clean of such things the soul of this man who is now in their power and being initiated into their grand mysteries, they proceed at once to bring home again violence and anarchy and licentiousness and immodesty,
Mm-hmm.
with a long train of attendants, resplendent with garlands about their heads. And they glorify them and call them by soft names. Violence is now good breeding. Anarchy is liberty. Licentiousness is magnificence. And modesty is courage. There you see more or less how the young man who was being trained among necessary desires is led into the emancipation and release of unnecessary and unprofitable pleasures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who are lotus eaters?
And that little part
mystery
there,
schools and
in that
right.
little part, he's
Come
talking
on
about
now.
how the oligarchical
Uh-huh.
youth becomes the democratic
Mm-hmm.
youth,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you can tell he has this disdain because for someone who is all about optimization,
Mm-hmm.
right? Democracy is not optimized
Mm-hmm.
or doesn't always make optimal decisions.
Mm-hmm.
The best people don't always find themselves in the best positions
Mm-hmm.
in a democracy
Mm-hmm.
because it's all of a popularity contest
Yes.
at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So when all that happens, everything becomes topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
That thriftiness goes out the window,
Mm-hmm.
right? Anarchy is liberty.
Right.
Licentiousness is magnificence,
Mm-hmm.
right? Temperance is cowardice.
Right.
Everything
Right.
becomes inverse.
Right.
And that person who had profitable ideals gives themselves to unprofitable pleasures,
Mm-hmm.
as Plato calls it.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, he's harping on the cognitive dissonance.
Because in all of these situations here, the thing that Socrates, Plato, he misses, I guess, or I don't know, yes, misses,
Mm-hmm.
is the human behavior,
Mm-hmm.
how people respond, how people are, and so trying to commit people to relegate them to a particular
Life isn't about doing the thing that person is best at doing.
right.
It's about doing what you like.
Yes.
About doing what you like.
Yeah.
And for him,
and you can change your mind. You don't have,
Yeah.
That's what people do.
and for him, that is undisciplined.
Discipline.
That's unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Everything must be what it is.
Right.
And you can only be that one thing that you're good at.
Right.
Aristocracy will create a culture
Right.
that understands that.
Choice. What's that?
Your
No.
choices have been made by the state.
That's right.
by your rulers who
That's
know
right.
best.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
You see how an oligarchy can transform into a democracy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, let's talk about your aristocracy here for a
Mm-hmm.
moment. Your aristocracy prioritizes one particular type of person.
That's right.
Human nature has shown us time and time again that it doesn't matter what form you try to force on a person, they're going to do their best to be what they really are,
Mm-hmm.
whether it is in secret or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like you talk about with oligarchies, how democracy becomes an oligarchy. Everybody wants to hide their riches away,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what they value the most. Well, what is going to be hidden from your leaders now?
Right.
From your best?
Mm-hmm.
What's going to be hidden from them?
Right. Nothing.
Everything.
Right.
Everything that the former actually wants.
Mm-hmm.
Now you talk about city within cities, divisions within divisions.
Mm-hmm.
This is how your aristocracy becomes a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is stifling human ambition and the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
It's stifling life.
Mm-hmm.
And when a farmer says that I don't want to do this anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and he finds himself being banished from your city or whatever other punishment
Right.
your rulers see fit to give to these people,
Mm-hmm.
what are you gonna have then?
Right.
You're gonna have what did you call it? You're gonna have what did he say?
You have this
Revolution.
This
Yes,
revolution, right?
You're gonna have revolution
Mhm.
on the tongues of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And when they get in the battle, they're gonna see their rulers, right, fighting these battles.
Mhm.
But for Plato, these rulers are going to be dogs of war. They're
Right.
going to see these things, and guess what? It's not going to matter.
Right.
It's not going to matter.
Even in trying to stifle, right? Because I said nothing will be stifled.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that even in this stagnation that you're trying to create, you are going to have people who are going to respond. They're going to rebel against that, regardless of the condition that you put them in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I had mentioned either yesterday or whatever that when you think about our enslavement, right? When you think about that, we never lost our humanity, regardless of what others may have thought and said about us. We were still a people. We still had people with feelings. We still wanted more. We still strive. We still did all of the things that
A human being does.
that people do, that human beings do. We still did all of those things. Even under the most precarious and dangerous condition, we still learning how to read, dog.
And
We're still doing these things.
You can have the best of
The best, right?
in position to rule,
Mm-hmm.
to win the war.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody wins for long.
Right.
Nobody wins forever. You need to keep winning. Whereas your revolutionists only have to win once.
That's it.
You have to win every time.
That's right.
All they have to do is win
One.
once. You lose one time
Mhm.
and it's all gone.
Mhm.
And no one can lose. No one wins forever.
Right. You will lose.
You will lose at some point. So that's why you compromise.
Mhm.
That's how your aristocracy becomes democracy.
Mhm.
In defense
Of itself.
Once again,
Mhm.
so you can recognize, you can see it.
Mhm.
You can see it everywhere, but you can't see within how your own ideals create that.
Mhm.
You're creating an atmosphere that tells people that they are not the best, that they are bronze and iron,
Mhm.
that only the silver and gold can rule. You're more suited for this work,
Mhm.
which we already say is not the best work,
Mhm.
right? And if you want to do anything else, then that's outside of our purview, and we're going to make sure that you only have those things that allow you to be this.
Mhm.
If you try to attain for something outside of your position, you're going to get banished, or
Right.
you're going to be put to the sword, or however you want
Right.
to deal with the situation.
Mhm.
You're going to enforce your rule, like you said, enforce through arms or through fear.
Mhm.
It's the only way this works.
Right.
And you do that, and what you get? You get a mess.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
because
all it takes
that's
is
the move that you're going
one
to constantly have to do.
loss.
That's right.
one loss. Even the best lose.
Mhm.
One time.
Mhm.
and then it's all over.
Right.
And so you compromise.
Right.
You compromise, and your rule of the best becomes. Sometimes your aristocracy ends up just becoming a dictatorship.
Yeah.
Goes right to tyranny. Look
Mhm.
at the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
You can skip over the whole democracy part.
Yeah.
You just go straight to tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Your people are going to respond.
you can see it. You can see it everywhere else.
Yeah, but you can't see
You
it.
can't see it within.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, in his analysis of oligarchies and his analysis of democracy, he's on point.
Yeah. He's spot
He's
right.
on point.
Uh-huh.
Right? Because there is you could say a lack of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lack of discipline because it's people live their lives the way that they want to live.
Live right.
You may call that as a lack of efficiency. Others call that freedom.
Right.
You may call it anarchy. Others call it liberty.
Mm-hmm.
The same logic can be thrown right back at you.
Right. It's all about
there's a reason why
your perspective and how you see things.
There's a reason why those particular type of governments, aristocracies, lasted for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the world was feudal for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But when it died almost completely.
Mm-hmm.
All at once. World War I marked the end of aristocracy
Mm-hmm.
and the rise of fascism
Mm-hmm.
in Europe. Fascism and democracy.
Mm-hmm.
All that went out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, you can't win forever.
Right.
You can't win forever. And none of this stuff is going to last.
Right. And for those, like if you are familiar like with Amos Wilson, he even talks about this. None of this lasts forever. There's going to be a breaking point. Where are you going to be in that breaking point? That's basically what this is. And so even in Plato's, Socrates' time, every one of these, constitutions, they all have their breaking points. Why? Because of how people respond.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be that circle. It goes over and over again. You're going to have people who are not going to respond the way that you think that they should respond.
Mm-hmm.
That's just what it is. That's what people do.
That's what people do.
People live. That's what they do.
And sometimes the most life-affirming thing that a person can do is making a suboptimal decision, is being wrong.
Right.
The freedom to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
People will rebel against all your rightness, all your optimization, just to be wrong.
Yep.
Because they want to be. Mm-hmm. Because that's the one freedom they can get in your society.
Mm-hmm.
Is to be your opposition.
Right.
And you end up creating the very thing you think that you're opposing.
Right. You're entrenching it.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So now let's talk about tyranny.
Tyranny, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we always talk about how these things always rise in defense of one another.
Mm-hmm.
So now he says, because he's talking about how the indulgences of what you call it, the indulgences of democracy tends to create the type of person that needs a tyrant in a sense. And he says, and so he spends his life every day indulging the desire that comes along. Now he drinks deep and toodles on the pipes. Then again, he drinks water and goes in for swimming. At times it is bodily exercise, at times idleness, some complete carelessness. Sometimes he makes a show of studying philosophy. Often he appears in politics and just ups to say and do whatever comes into his head. Perhaps the fame of a military man makes him envious, and he tries that. Or a lord of finance. There he is again. There is no discipline or necessity in his life, but he calls it delightful and free and full of blessings and follows it all his days. "Upon my word," said he, "that's a lifelike picture of the man who is all for equal laws." So you see, said I, so you see, this, I think, is a variegated man, full of all sorts of conditions and manners. This is the beautiful, many-colored man exactly like that city, one whose life many a man and many a woman would envy, having in himself patterns innumerable of constitutions and characters.
Mm-hmm.
That's the very man. Very well. Let such a man be ranked beside our democracy as a democratic man rightly so called. Yet let him be ranked there, said he. And now for the most beautiful constitution and the most beautiful man. That's what is left for us to describe. Tyranny and the tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
So like he says, you have the variegated man
Mm-hmm.
who has lived a life that men and women would envy, that
Mm-hmm.
did so much, had so many experiences,
Mm-hmm.
right? But left himself open to tyranny
Mm-hmm.
because he would do anything and turned to anything
Mm-hmm.
to defend that freedom, even if it means giving it all up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the tyranny is my favorite,
Mm-hmm. Because at this
my
point, it's
favorite
like,
part. My
I don't
favorite
know
part.
what you can say
Yeah.
to this man. I don't know what you can say to him. All right,
Mm-hmm.
because at this point, when you talk about tyranny,
Yeah, he's
all that is dead on.
yeah.
So
Let's get
let's get it.
it.
Tell me then, my dear friend, how does tyranny come about? Of course, democracy changes into this. So much is clear enough, quite clear. Then does tyranny come out of democracy more or less in the same way as democracy comes out of oligarchy? How? What they set before them as their good, said I, and through which oligarchy was established. That was riches, wasn't it? Yes. So then oligarchy was destroyed by the insatiate desire for riches and disregard of everything else for the sake of money making. True, said he, then is democracy also dissolved by insatiate desire for that which it defines as good. What do you say it defines? Liberty, I said. That, I suppose, you would always hear described as most beautiful in the democratic city, and therefore this is the only city where a man of free nature thinks life worth living. Oh yes, he said, that word is on every tongue. It is true then, and I was going to say that the insatiate desire for this, in disregard to everything else, transformed the Constitution here also, and makes it want a tyranny. How? When a democratic city athirst for liberty gets worthless butlers presiding over its wine, and has drunk too deep of liberty's heady draught, then I think if the rulers are not very obliging, and Rome
Mm-hmm.
provide plenty of liberty, it calls them blackguards and oligarchs and chastises them. So they do, said he.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and any who obey the rulers, they trample in the dust as willing slaves, and not worth a jot. The rulers who are like subjects, and subjects who are like rulers, come in for the votes of thanks and the honors, public and private. In such a city, must not your liberty go to all lengths? Of course it must. And it must go creeping, my friend, into private houses too. And the end is, their anarchy even gets into the animals. Why, how can that be? That is how the father gets into the habit of behaving like the son and fears his own children. The son
Mm-hmm.
behaves like a father and does not honor or fear his parents. Must have liberty, he says. Settler is equal to citizen and citizen to settler. The foreigner is the same. Yes, that's what happens. And there are these other trifles. Teacher fears pupil in such a state of things and plays the today. Pupils despise their teachers and tutors, and in general the young imitate their elders and stand up to them in word and deed. Old men give way to the young. They they are all compliances and wrangling, and behave like young men themselves so as not to be thought disagreeable or dictatorial. And just so, said he, and behold, the topmost pinnacle, mob liberty, can go no further in such a city, where slaves bought with money, both men and women, are no less free than their buyers. Ah, I almost forgot to tell how great equality and liberty there is between women and men, between men and women. Shall we say what now cometh to our lips, he rejoined, as Aeschylus puts it, by all means, so I will. The domestic animals, how much more free and easy they are in a city like this than any other. No one believe who had not seen it. There's really nothing to choose between misers and bitch, as the proverb goes. Horses and asses, if you please, adopt the habit of marching along with the greatest freedom and hardiness, bumping into everyone they meet who will not get out of the way. And all the other animals likewise are filled full of liberty. Oh, that's just my own dream come true, said the other. That often happens to me when I'm going out into the country. To sum up, observe what comes of all these things. Together, how touching it makes the people. They fret at the least hint of servitude, and won't have it. For at last, they care nothing for the laws written or unwritten, that no one may be their master in anything.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes, I know that. This, then, my friend, is the beginning from which tyranny grows. Such a beautiful, bright beginning. Bright and gay indeed. But what comes after that? The same as in the oligarchy. The same disease which destroyed that gets in here stronger and more violent from this liberty and enslaves democracy. And in fact, that is what generally happens to the world. To do anything too much tends to make you to the opposite extreme in weather and in plants and in living bodies, and so also in constitutions most of all. That is likely. For too great liberty seems to change into nothing else than too great slavery, both in man and in city.
I mean,
that's a slam dunk.
yeah.
That's a slam dunk. Really, so really, this whole ending part, I cannot recommend this one chapter
Yeah,
enough.
enough. I mean, he, look, he is
On
he is on point
on
when it comes to tyranny. I'm not saying that he's at on point with others, but with tyranny, oh my god, oh my goodness,
so what
like what?
so what Plato is plainly saying is that you have a people that value their liberty
Mm-hmm.
to the exclusion of all things.
Right.
And when their leaders cannot provide them
Mm-hmm.
the type of liberty
Right.
that they are accustomed to, their leaders become accused of being oligarchs and blackguards, as he calls them.
Mm-hmm.
And in defense of their liberty, they turn to a tyrant, to someone who promises them the liberty that they once had. The liberty that they once had before these new oligarchs and blackguards came along, promises them this. And in defense of their liberty, gets rid of the governing body as it is. And in further of defense of their liberty, gets rid of any opposition to the tyrant.
That's right.
And keeps going, defending said liberty, which only means defending
The
themselves.
tyrant. That's right. And that tyrant.
And before you know it, these people who thought they had a guardian have a tyrant.
That's right. When a tyrant appears, he grows simply and solely from a protectorship as the root.
Mm-hmm.
He is set up to protect
the people. And all he ends up doing is protecting himself. And then, like he said, you go from the freest of freedoms to the most terrible of servitudes. Because now, in defense of your freedom, you gave it all away to a tyrant. We've talked about that.
I don't know how many times.
So many times. So many times. When people want simple answers, easy answers, and they are desperate and they want action. They want something to be done now.
Right.
Now. They turn to a person who says, I'm going to give it to you.
That's right.
Now. And what happens?
Pick a tyrant and tell me.
Pick a tyrant.
Yeah, pick a tyrant and tell me that's not the story.
From Hitler to Stalin to Mussolini to Idi Amin.
Pick a tyrant, it's the same story.
The same story over and over and over again. They turn to this person in their desperation.
That's right.
To do all the things that they said they were going to do. And then, like all governments, they equate the health of their society to the health of their government. But in this instance, the government is merely one person. One person and their wants and their needs. And that one person rules to the benefit of themselves to the exclusion of all things. Because they themselves are the health of the society. That's when you get dictators.
Right.
That's when you get kings.
Right. Right. That's right. So we're going back to the faith.
So
right. We're going
and
back to
then
the faith.
as a defense of rulers and
Mhm.
defense of kingship, that's how you get aristocracy.
Right.
Opening themselves up little by little to other people
Mhm.
who can embolden the ruler.
Right.
And you help to, defend their position.
Mhm.
You get other royal families.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
get from Hitler, you get Goebbels.
Right. right. Right.
Over and over
Over
and over again. And thus the cycle continues.
Mhm.
Now, that's not what Plato said, because, he loves aristocracy.
Yeah.
But that's what he is showing.
Mhm.
How all these particular governments rise in defense of themselves.
Mhm.
And they end up sacrificing themselves to that thing that they thought was defending them.
Mhm.
And over and over and over again, the cycle continues,
Mhm.
rolling on. You have a love of honor becomes a love of wealth.
Mhm.
A love of wealth becomes a love of the freedom, the unmitigated freedom to pursue it.
Right.
And to defend that freedom, you turn to a tyrant that takes away all of it.
Mhm.
All your freedom, all your wealth, all your honor.
Mhm.
And you are left with nothing but them.
Mhm.
And for the tyrant to defend themselves,
well,
you get aristocracy.
Mhm.
You get other royals and nobles and people who are best able to befriend and help the tyrant maintain their rule. And once the tyrant is gone, dead most likely,
right.
then you get a bunch of people vying for that seat
Yep.
once more.
Mhm.
But you got to do it the right way.
Whatever that means, right?
That's where you get honor again.
Yeah, sure.
Over and over again. That's where you get your honor.
Uh-huh.
And what's the right way? Well, those who have the most money.
That's right.
And you get to establish what that is.
Mhm.
Oligarchy.
Right.
And for the oligarchy to defend itself against the poor, it opens itself up to the poor.
Right.
Democracy.
Democracy, that's right.
Over and over again. Like we said, Plato is more right
Mhm.
than he knows.
Yeah, because at the time, yeah.
And this is prophetic. It's like he's reaching into the future.
Mhm.
Plato taught was a teacher of Alexander the Great,
Mhm.
the person who created the great, Greek empire at the moment.
Mhm.
Before it all fell apart after
Yeah.
his death. But so he knows about dictators,
Mhm.
and for all his teachings, he created one of the greatest dictators the world ever knew.
Mhm.
It's a sunk cost fallacy. You can't do this the right way.
There is no right way.
All there is are dictators.
Mhm.
That's all it is. Over and over and over again.
And you can mask it
And no, doesn't matter
any kind of way you want to. Right.
No matter how far you go to try to defend it, what you end up becoming, it always is like you said, in service to that one ideal, to maintaining itself. It puts on mask upon mask upon mask until it all breaks apart again.
Mhm.
And then what does it do? Put on another mask.
Yep.
And it starts all over again. Let's say Plato, if there's any chapter you're going to read from the Republic, read this one.
Because he was spot on.
Because there's so many things that, so many things we left out, so many things we didn't touch on. But the biggest point in all of this is that for Plato, for Socrates, these governments produce people, suboptimal people, that fall further and further and further into debauchery and madness. Always trying to defend that thing that they found in their madness that they treasure so, greatly. And they keep doing this to the exclusion of everything else. And for Plato, he can look out across, and see all these different cities, because that's what really Greek was. Greece, just a bunch of city-states that work together. He sees all these different cities and all these different places, all of them fail. And even where he is, failing, falling to all these vices over and over and over again. And he's thinking the entire time, if they would just yield to the rule of the best, if they would just have the best people in position to do these things. And he's a philosopher who spends his time amongst philosophers. And everybody, all these philosophers do the one thing that philosophers always do: complain.
Yep. Right.
And they talk about, if I were in power, I would do this.
This, right.
And Plato's like, well, you should be in power.
Mm-hmm.
You're very smart.
Right.
You're very careful and tactful.
Mm-hmm.
You should be in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Not knowing that there's a reason that they are not.
That's right. They're philosophers.
Because they're philosophers.
Because they're philosophers. You know?
Like the philosopher king is like trying to make Jon Stewart the president.
Mm-hmm.
He's a comedian.
Mm-hmm. Stay in your lane, bro.
And the comedian, like the philosopher,
Uh-huh.
is good at pointing out all the things that are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to actually changing and enacting change, that's not what they're there for.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what the ruler is there for.
Yeah.
The ruler isn't there to change anything,
But to maintain
to
his rule.
maintain itself, to
Right.
maintain that rule.
Mm-hmm.
To change takes something else entirely.
Right.
Like we've talked before with
Right.
anarchy and all
Mhm.
this stuff. It takes something else entirely.
Mm-hmm.
But Plato, he's rubbing up against that.
Mm-hmm.
If only he wasn't an aristocrat. And maybe he could pierce a bit further.
Right.
But yeah.
So that's where we are.
So that's where we are. That was book 8. And we said that comes highly recommended.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like we said many times before, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments. And once again, thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you.